Welcome to Reconnect, the podcast dedicated to sharing and defending the good news of Jesus Christ. All religions except Christianity require mankind to work to overcome our greatest problem. It is in Christianity alone that we have divine redemption through the person and work of Jesus of Nazareth, who through his life, death, and resurrection defeated sin, death, and the devil forever. Reconnect us, O Lord. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Reconnect. My name's Andy Rasman. This time I have a new guest with me, Jonathan Ruehs. He is campus pastor at, not the campus pastor, I guess it's one of the campus pastors at Concordia University Irvine. If you haven't caught on, most of my guests come from either Korean Lutheran High School or Concordia University Irvine. Those are the connections I have, the LCMS Lutheran world here in Southern California, Orange County. Jonathan, I've met him through some evangelism trips to University California Irvine, nearby the local public university. And one of those nights, we were out there sharing the gospel. The Walking Dead came up. I think you actually used The Walking Dead.
Did I
talking to someone that was at the table with
nice.
us
All right.
that wasn't a believer, I think. And I thought that was pretty cool. And I go, you watched that show? And you said, yeah. And I thought, why are you watching some zombie horror sort of movie show? It's just killing zombies. I don't know. Zombie movies aren't slasher films, right?
Right.
So that's the topic, listeners. We're talking Walking Dead. I eventually got into the show, and it's from Jonathan partly because he said, there's a Christian character on there, and he says some interesting things periodically that make you think. And I go, okay, there's a Christian character that actually references the Bible with what's going on. I'll give it a shot. I actually really enjoyed the show. I saw there was a whole lot more than just killing zombies.
Right.
And I'd like that. And I thought it'd be cool to just talk about that and hopefully connect the Christian worldview to what's going on. Yeah. So maybe, Jonathan, first thing, why do you watch the show?
Great question.
As a Christian,
as
a pastor, and do you ever have people question you about that, finding out you're a Christian and a pastor, thinking this isn't appropriate material?
You know what? I've never had that other than you.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's funny because I bump into a lot of Christians that actually watch it.
Okay.
And so it becomes kind of a common point of discussion amongst us is saying, hey, why do you watch it kind of thing? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? What have you? But I think I got into it because I was very intrigued by the whole zombie phenomenon that we see in pop culture. Mm-hmm. And I think there's more to it than what most people initially surface think. Definitely there's a lot of zombie films and TV shows out there that are all just about more of the, as you mentioned, more slasher oriented. Mm-hmm. It's all about the gore factor. It's all about the that kind of how gross can we make it be? And there are times I will admit that Walking Dead kind of flirts with that line with some of the episodes. I think where it can get it gets a little too much for me. But then again, Passion of the Christ can get a little bit too much too as well. So there could be an interesting discussion there about about gore and religious films and
context and
films.
Reason. Right?
Yeah, that's right. So, but I got into that because I think that for me, zombie films, television shows, most specifically Walking Dead, is really, I think, asked the question, what does it mean to be human? Mm. I think it was Nietzsche that said, beware when you're hunting monsters that you don't become one yourself. And I just think that's the great motto for The Walking Dead. Mm-hmm. As they kind of explore this idea of what does it mean to be human in the midst of this world that's gone to hell. And as they try to eke out this new existence kind of a thing, the new normal, so to speak, know. So I think that's for me is what's became very intriguing. And Walking Dead became, as I started watching it was really more about the drama and the scenarios and the situations and the dialogues that were going on that were really deep.
Right.
And that's why I got into watching it.
Very cool. I like how you mention we could become the monster. Mm-hmm. And what I find fascinating in the show, after about season 1, even during season 1, you kind of start to see this, but certainly after season 1 and season 2, you really start to find that they don't have to fear the zombies so much.
Right.
They have to fear the other living people more.
Right.
Could you get into some of that?
Yeah,
is that something you get? Like, who's really the monster? And how that plays out?
I think what the interesting thing is, and you see this in George Romero's work, who's the guy who did all the Night of the Living Dead movies and everything too. And there's actually more depth in those films than we tend to give credit for it. And because I think Romero really begins to ask some of those questions about what does it mean to be human? Who truly is the monster? Is it the zombie, or is it the humans who are surviving and how they're acting? And so I think you see a similar thing in The Walking Dead. I think you see these stark contrasts with characters. You know, some of these guys who are the leaders of these sort of supposedly utopian communities and everything, you look at them and you're like, these guys are, you know, I think they're more in line of being monsters than they are being human. And they actually are dehumanizing people in results of this. I think also, too, you see this in the engagement with how people treat the zombies themselves, especially people they used to know, right? And who have transformed, you know? And I think there's a very interesting dynamic that goes on there, too, as well, of saying, you know, how do I, you know, I need to get rid of this person because they've become now a threat to all that I still love, yet I still love this person. And you saw this, I think it was season 1. It was the two sisters, and one of them becomes a zombie, and how she has to go through that process of how I need to be the one. Somebody else was going to step up and take care of it, but she's like, no, I need to be the one to do this kind of thing. And so there's some very interesting notions about compassion that goes on even in the midst of all of that. And I guess you could talk about the idea of mercy killing. You know, I don't want to get off track and discussion in regards to the idea of, you know, like life issues, but I think in that regards, I think that's very, very fascinating. It becomes part of that question of what it means to be human, you know?
Yeah, I don't think it's too off track, because to me, that's what drew me in. And it wasn't probably till season 2. Yeah. That drew, like, first it was like kind of survival. Right. A guy wakes up, what happened to the world? Who are these people? How do I live? What's going on? Right. Because apparently he was in a coma during the breakout of this, and he wakes up in Monsterland, right? And has to find his family. And that was kind of cool, the way the cinematography behind it, the special effects. I like the fact that it's AMC. Right. It's not HBO. Right. So if it was HBO, I probably wouldn't be watching it. Right. So because they probably would be going too far over the top to go, does it really justify the story, or is it more now etching on pornographic? Right. So, but it's about the drama. Right. With this backdrop. Right. And it made me start to really question, like, in a world, if the government was completely pulled out, or let's say the power went out for a whole week or more, I don't know if it's an EMT or what, but one of those little attacks where they can take out all the electronics.
The EMP.
EMP. So it's like, whoa, if one of those hit, what happens?
Yeah, right.
You know, like, what do we do? Where would society be? Where would I even get my food, right? How much food do I have in my refrigerator? Would it then become survival of the fittest, like, very quickly? Right. And do you get little groups? Do you get law and order in your groups? Who eats? Who has how much? How do you get more food? Like, I thought it was just kind of fun to put yourselves in these situations and just see how it plays out. And when would you have to protect yourself physically? Right. And different things, like just kind of putting myself in these situations, which it's not a zombie apocalypse, but these are real things that maybe could happen in our lifetime.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, because I just went to listened to a panel discussion at Chapman University about 2-3 weeks ago, and it was on the whole idea of the zombie apocalypse, and they brought in Max Brooks, who's the author of World War Z and the Zombie Survival Guide. And of course, he's also one of the writers on the World War Z movie. They also brought Rick Grimes' wife. I forget her name, but she was there as part of the panel discussion. And then they had some different professors. And Max Brooks actually talked about, and this was fascinating, the basis of his book, World War Z, it was based off of true, other than the zombies, it was based off of true stories of people surviving in worlds where, in situations where, there might have been virus outbreaks or different kinds of things. So he had his basis in reality. And so it really becomes a symbol of these kinds of things, the EMP attacks or, virus outbreaks or what have you kind of a thing too, right? I mean, we can take the zombie movie and juxtapose it with any of those kind of virus outbreak movies kind of thing, and just saying we're just replacing one virus with another, but they're kind of dealing with the same kind of wrestling of the issues. And one of the fascinating things I gleaned out of that panel discussion was Max Brooks said he's not a Christian. In fact, he's at a background being Jewish. His father was a famous Mel Brooks. And he, I think, is probably more of a secular Jew, but he said, you know what, if you are prepared yourself, then it allows you to much more easily help out your neighbor. And he used that language, and I'm just like, boom, there you go. Love your neighbor. There's Jesus language right there. That's very fascinating to think about how it wasn't all dog eat dog, all about myself, create my compound, but how is it that I need to take care of my own so that also I can be a resource to my neighbor around me.
That's interesting. My Christian buddy, who is a doomsday prepper type person, he speaks along those lines too. Because he's like, if you're not prepared, you're going to have to take.
Right.
And if you are prepared, then you can give.
Right.
And it's interesting. He goes, I'm preparing for you. I'm preparing for you. I'm preparing for you. And it's like, oh, okay. So he's not just preparing for himself. And it's the same type of language, you know, because obviously if he just prepared for himself, how long is that going to really last in like any sort of scenario, even if it's just like an earthquake that we have that is really bad, you know, like how long does it take to get water if we don't get food? Like, the store's empty immediately, you know, like what do we do? Because I'm not growing crops, you know, like I don't have canned food. We're in trouble.
That's right.
So it's just very interesting stuff to put into like a real life scenario. And like as a Christian, in that scenario, I don't want to now go steal from my neighbor who has food. Like, it's very like it is an interesting thing to think about.
I agree.
And to prepare for.
And even that too, I think it comes down to. Have you seen the Fear the Walking Dead, the spin-off show?
Oh, I think I like that one better actually.
Do you remember? I think they have season 2 now.
Yeah, they finished season 2.
Season 1, there was the next door neighbor, the woman who would become a zombie, right? And I think there was that whole. I think there's something there to be said. You know, is it loving our neighbor actually? Now, of course, this is just fantasizing a little bit, but. Is it actually loving our neighbor by taking our neighbor out? Right. So was it going back to the idea of mercy killing? Was it better that they actually killed her so that way she couldn't affect other people, and that was a loving act versus just doing it mindlessly? And I think in The Walking Dead, you come to a point where you see the group, it becomes robotic for them to slash and hack through zombie hordes, right?
Yeah.
And so what I think is interesting too about that is that when you lose this sense of humanity, even with the zombie, it also affects the way that you look at people who are not zombies. And so the way that Rick Grimes is, for me, is a very interesting character because you see him lose a couple of his moral compasses in the seasons. And when he loses those moral compasses, he all of a sudden goes down more becoming the monster. And so for me, when I watch that and I see him becoming like this, it becomes that situation of like he has no qualms about all of a sudden killing real people.
Yep.
In fact, it was last season or season before when they're in the utopian community, and he kills that lady's husband, right? And there was just no like qualms about it. And then the guy who's his new moral compass, the African American guy who comes in, and he's just like stunned to see. Who was actually he was from season 1 kind of a thing, was interesting and just sort of like, what's going on here?
What became of you, Rick?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's fascinating to think about how, as you're hunting these monsters, you're becoming a monster now because now you just really have no qualm about killing somebody who is, not like you or what have you. So
yeah, definitely.
So there was a lot of vomiting right there. So
yeah, yeah, very, very. The episode that really got me on it was the episode they have. It's almost the entire episode was them having a jury about this person hasn't really done anything wrong yet, but they're in another group that we know does wrong. And this person's really just in that group probably to survive. But we know if we let them go let this guy go, he's going to go back to this group, tell him we're here, and then everyone's going to come.
Right.
And now we're going to be fighting and killing probably. But we don't know for a fact that this guy's going to go there. He's telling us, I'm not going to go back and tell them that I'm here.
Right.
But do we kill this person or not? Right.
Yeah.
And so they have a whole debate. And
Right.
the Christian character in the show at that time, the really main Christian character, was really making the stance of this is not who we are.
Yep.
This is not how we do things. We don't just kill people unless they have done something wrong. Right? Like we don't play mind games.
Right.
And try to play God essentially.
Right.
And they ended up letting the guy go.
Right.
And what happened?
Right. He told
pain came, but the Christian guy's like, well, that's how you got to play it.
Right.
And then later, now, it's almost like they repeated that scenario. There's a different character, a lady, that got caught in a similar situation with a group. And she goes, I swear I won't tell anyone that you guys are here. I'm going to go. No one's going to come. We're not going to take anything. I'm going to let you have your peace. Let me go. And they let her go. And what does she do? The Rick Grimes group.
Right.
That let someone, they go and take from this group.
Right.
Because they got something that they need.
Right.
So it's the same type thing. Like,
right.
What's the moral? Like, are you supposed to kill that person? You're not supposed to.
Right. Right.
Like, how does it play out?
Right.
So I just think it's fun to watch this because I don't know many shows that I can watch and literally have, like, watch an ethical debate
right.
over this sort of stuff. And, like, real life scenario, that was that SEAL team. And I don't know if it was Afghanistan, but it was the Lone Survivor book and movie. They had that scenario where the SEAL team gets found. Do we kill this young boy that found us?
Right.
Or do we let him go? And likely if we let him go, he's going to tell the bad guys in this town and they're all going to come after us. And I only saw the movie. I haven't really followed much of the real life story, but I think the movie was based on the book written by the SEAL guy that survived, the lone survivor. And like they got it. And, you know, it was kind of like, whoa. Like, and it was interesting. The movie at least had the whole team debating.
Interesting.
And they didn't all come to the same agreement. And some of the ones, they whatever the chain of command on the decision, they stuck to. But the one guy was like, okay, we're all okay. Just so you know, this is going to happen bad for us.
Wow.
But it was kind of a cool thing because it was like, this guy here, we don't know that he's going to tell. He could be innocent. We don't know if he's even a part of this group. We don't know where he stands. We're not communicating with him in English.
Right.
What do we do?
Right.
And are we going to be the good guys? We're going to be the bad guys.
Right.
And the good guys are going to let him go, even if it means we're going to die.
Right.
So it's just so interesting to me that, like, all this is going on from just a, quote, zombie movie.
Right.
And I can't think of any other shows where I get this from.
Yeah, no. And what I like what you said, too, was that it's based on reality. I mean, these are real scenarios. These are real ethical dilemmas that people go through. I heard a story from a guy who was a survivor of the killing fields in Cambodia.
Oh, wow.
And he escaped, was wounded in the process. I think he was a teenager at the time. He stayed in was like a hay bale. He hid out in it. He was discovered by some ladies in the village, but the ladies took care of him. And it was, I think it was like almost up to a year that he was living in this hay bale because he was having to heal up from his wounds and hiding out, and it just wasn't safe. Yeah. And so they kept bringing him food, but they were risking being caught themselves. And yet they were taking care of him, kind of thing. And so it was very fascinating to hear about how people were acting in the midst of all that. And the guy now is the Lutheran Hour speaker of Cambodia.
Awesome.
So, so these are, like, again, Max Brooks, right? His basis of true stories of these people dealing with the nature of these kinds of scenarios and stuff too. So I think that allows us, maybe in a sense, a safe place to kind of wrestle through some of those things, and maybe help us to think through what might I do, so that if ever we were in that situation, you know, we've given some thought to it.
And there actually are some Christian characters.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Christianity in the show? The way it's presented, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Even the characters themselves.
I actually love the fact that Christianity is brought in the show, because oftentimes you watch some of these other similar kinds of shows and religion is never brought in, you know, kind of a thing. And so I love the fact that they don't hide away from it. And I think it was season 1 or season 2 when Rick Grimes goes into the church. Do you remember that one? And it's interesting because he goes in the church. There's like 3 zombies in there. They're kind of sitting in the pews. but they get up, and they take them out. But they were looking for that one girl. And I can't remember her name, right? And so
I think they all pray in that episode.
Yeah, and he goes to the front of the church, and there's this crucifix, and he's just railing against God. But it's this really very interesting scene that could really have a great conversation around, because it's the crucified God that he's talking to. The nature of suffering and, is right there as they're dealing with this whole issue of trying to find this. And so I love the fact.
So hold on. I didn't think of he's railing against a crucified God. So was the picture actually like a crucifix where you see Jesus on a cross?
Yeah, I mean it was this huge crucifix in the front of the church.
How ironic, huh?
And so he's looking at this crucified Jesus and just and I think it's been cool then too, as we see the veterinarian character who is a Christian, who is blatantly a Christian. I love the fact too that he wrestles through understanding the nature of his faith in this new world, but doesn't give up on it. There's a great quote that was right around Easter time of the year when that came out, and he goes, "You know what? When I read about the resurrection in the Bible, I pictured something totally different." So he's kind of trying to wrestle through what's going on here and those kinds of things, but he doesn't give up on it. Kind of a thing too. He sees that this isn't incompatible with what's going on, even though he's struggling through. And then you get the priest,
especially if this is a virus.
Right.
We don't know what it is in this world.
Right.
So if it's a virus, that doesn't go against Scripture. This isn't the real resurrection. This is, for some reason, somehow, dead corpses can become animated again. Because these aren't people anymore. They've already, I think, even in our conversation talking about, we distinguished that these are not humans anymore.
Right.
But who are we, and how do we not become them?
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think that's an important thing as we think through that, is this idea of even that dimension is, you have these non-conscious beings versus us who are conscious oriented. One of the things I wrestle through, kind of getting back to the humanity question too, is, what really does it mean to be human? These zombies are acting on the basis of their new nature, right? Which just means to be consuming, mindless consumers. They don't have consciousness anymore. But the humans in the show have consciousness. They have will. So it really becomes, are you going to be like the zombie and be consuming in your desires and your wants and what have you, kind of a thing? Or are you going to fight against that? Yeah. And George Romero, in his second film of the I can't remember the name of it, but takes place in a mall.
Is that the Night of the Living Dead?
Night of the Living Dead was the first one. I think it's called Day of the Dead is the second one.
Oh, he didn't just add a number behind it.
Right, yeah. And so the second movie takes place in a mall. And the whole idea is to really question, is this whole social commentary is in our materialistic society, are we just these consuming, shambling meat bags kind of a thing? Is that we're just, and I think it's interesting. I one time did a message at Concordia Chapel, the zombie message.
Cool. I was going to ask you, okay, sharing the gospel is the theme of this podcast. Have you used this stuff?
So I did. I did. And so I actually showed a picture from that movie of zombies in the mall and contrast it with a picture of Black Friday.
Okay. Yeah.
And so you kind of ask the question of, have we really become I actually repeatedly said the phrase, the shambling, consuming meat bags, kind of thing. And so, and that message too, I think Paul's theology in Ephesians 2, right? Even though it's past tense, he talks about this condition of you were once dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you once walked. Yeah.
So we are the
living dead. Yeah, the walking dead. And I love that. And then also using that message to Ezekiel, the whole idea of the valley of the dry bones and what makes them live again. It's the word of God, in our lives. And so then I talked about the idea about how it is that how do we get out of this zombie-like condition, but Christ who has taken on that condition for us and gives us this new life and breathes this new life into us. So
it was back in high school for me. That would have been like 96 to 2000. I bounced around tons of churches. It was a Baptist church, and it was a high school service on Wednesday nights, and they actually did like a zombie thing like that and they made a video, and they just interviewed random people outside like a Walmart or something, asking questions about, do you believe in God? Do you believe this? Who's Jesus? And like one of the people was actually someone from my high school that they got. And his answer was, no, I don't believe in this stuff, and they connected to that, like the Walking Dead.
Right.
Before that show, obviously, but they used that type of language, and
Right.
it was the Ephesians 2 passage you just mentioned. And it was like, while we walk in our sins, and like we're dead, but we're walking in our sins and trespasses. Basically, like these are dead people walking.
Right.
And it's like everyone in the video, all these people, they're dead. They think they have life, but they're dead.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh wow, that's the guy at my school who's that whole like that's basically zombie.
Right.
And I was like, it had never really clicked. It was like one of the first times it really clicked with me. Like this stuff is real and it matters for eternal life. Like this is life or death here. Right. Even though I don't see zombies. Right. This is essentially what we are.
Right. Right. The spiritual zombie. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Like we're all going to the dust, but even right now while we're living, don't deceive ourselves. We're not more than dirt apart from Christ, apart from the Holy Spirit in us, giving us life. It's like mind blowing.
And it's interesting too with that. One of the seasons of Walking Dead, when they're in the church and they meet that, I think it's an Episcopal priest.
Yep. Gabriel.
There's all these little Easter eggs in this particular episode, because you see the scripture passages that are listed up there in the front of the church are all references to the resurrection or being dead and now you're alive again.
Nice.
And so it was really cool that
took that time.
Yeah, that they actually intentionally put that in there, and that it was just this kind of background part. And I didn't even pay attention to it until somebody was reading something online, somebody mentioned it. I'm like, and so I went back and looked through it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. And reading the passages, and like, that was pretty clever that they actually intentionally put these background stuff in there, Did
they have hymn numbers too? I wonder if the hymns.
I think they did.
I wonder if anyone could find out what the Episcopal Church, if they went so far to actually get an Episcopal Church.
I think they did. I think it's something to look up where they.
That's amazing.
It might have been some things of I want to say there was like a hymn that was referencing it, kind of a thing of like, you were once dead and now you're alive, and all this kind of stuff too. Is like, that's really fascinating. So I kind of wonder too, maybe writers on the show, if there's some writers who are Christian.
That's what I was thinking. I wonder where, what's the guy's name? Kirkman, that actually writes the comic and created it. I wonder where he sits on stuff.
Yeah. Because you're right, because Gabriel was a character in the comics, wasn't he?
Yeah. I actually printed something from the comics. I don't know if we could go through it at some point. Yeah. I thought it was interesting that in the comics, Gabriel uses the Walking Dead against Eugene, who's the mullet guy.
Yeah.
And who knows? The comics have strayed so far in some ways, from the TV show strayed from the comics in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But they haven't, right? So I don't even know. But this is certainly past this discussion. And Eugene's this blatant atheist with Gabriel, and they're talking. And there's a line in here where they're going back and forth, and he's just questioning the validity of hell and like how you get to heaven. And the guy's Episcopal, right? So he says, Eugene goes, so basically, if you do good deeds and not bad deeds, you go to heaven only if you believe in Jesus, So it's like you do good and bad and believe, and you're good. And Gabriel goes, yeah, that's right. So it makes it more than just faith.
Right.
Which isn't the official Episcopal
Yeah,
position.
I don't think it is. No.
So they made it off on that. But then it goes to, well, what about people who've never heard? How's that fair? And Gabriel's response is the hard line. They worshipped false idols. They turned away from the Lord. And he says, no, they weren't aware of Christianity. So it's not. So it's like, this is all in the comic.
Yeah,
you know. And so like the way it then plays out is like, one, how's that fair? They didn't know any better, and so they burn in hell for eternity. Two, why didn't they know? Why did God only tell people in a certain region of his existence, and then wait for those people to spread the news? That's inefficient. How couldn't he just appear in the sky one day and say, worship me, that I could get behind? That I could get behind. And it's cool, because if I was actually reading this and knew someone that wasn't a believer, I could be like, what do you think about this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely.
And they might have these exact same questions of Eugene, and I now get to talk about it with them.
Right.
Because of, we read this comic together.
Right.
But it's cool. Like, he then goes to take the whole, like, we can't explain everything route, and like, this isn't a cop-out. Like, maybe he exists beyond the level of our comprehension. what we think is fair may not be fair for him.
Right.
But then, like, he takes the whole thing and goes, is it so hard to believe, Brother Eugene? And he goes, I believe your beliefs are absurd. And he goes, are they? You are a man of science, and so I'm sure there was a time not too long ago when you would have told me how it was physically impossible for the dead to walk, and yet here we are. And he goes, point taken, but the living dead doesn't make me believe in the existence of a God. And he goes, no, but it's a start. So I thought it was interesting, like the way you mentioned the TV show used this apocalypse of the zombies to be against the Christian belief, like with Herschel. And Herschel's just like, whatever, it looks different than I thought, the resurrection. But here it's like using it against the atheist in this, fictional worldview. Like, yeah, but you would have said this was impossible.
Right.
So clearly things go against your known science that you can't deny right now. So, back then you would have said this would have been impossible. Right. So is it like step to God? Kind of cool. Right. I don't know. I think it's neat that like there's a couple things like this buried in the comic.
Yeah, that's cool.
It makes me wonder, like, where are the people that write this and stuff, and how does it work? Are there any other pieces in the show Walking Dead that you've used in Bible studies or messages, or if it is like something like you say you discuss this with your Christian friends, can you think of any that just kind of pop out that serve in this way?
I think mainly it's been what we've already talked about. There's not been really anything more other than, I think, just also kind of wrestling through this idea of, well, I think maybe probably the other thing too is this chatting about is I think it's good to cycle back to what we talked about in the beginning is, what's our vision of the world, or where is it going? People think that the world is just getting better. Other people think the world is getting worse. I tend towards the latter. I think that's actually a reflection of our Christian worldview that we see, in regards to the coming of Christ again, that these are the, the birth pangs and what have you kind of thing, that Jesus said there's going to be wars and rumors of wars and what have you kind of stuff. So, and I think it's a question to ask us if we truly are in the last days, that I believe we are, because of my position, and I think is your position too as well, is right. So after Christ ascended, we've been in the last days ever since then. So what does it mean? And this is what Paul asked him, what does it mean to live as people who are in the last days, right? And so as we deal with scenarios, I think back through history where those early Christians, right, as they dealt with about every day, they don't know if it's their last day. I think of Christian martyrs today in our own world, or people living in Muslim-dominated countries or communist countries and stuff like that too. They're in those same situations. We just have it nice and cushy in America, but that doesn't mean that our civilization one day isn't going to disappear. History shows that civilizations rise and fall, right, kind of a thing, or go through these dramatic changes. So how do we handle our Christian faith in the midst of all that? This is something that nags at me, and I think this is where it comes back to The Walking Dead too as well, is like, do we become too comfortable in our Christianity because we have this nice life of ease in America? And so that if things are to happen, how does it affect our faith? 9/11 for me was a watershed moment, which I think was for a lot of people. And one of the things I realized about 9/11 was that I took living in America for granted. I took what it meant to be a Christian in this society for granted. And I came to the conclusion that a lot of what I've already said already is that civilizations can fall. That doesn't mean that God is not God, right? Augustine dealt with this in his talking about the two cities as people were as at the time, right? Now the Roman Empire, and even becoming more of a Christian Roman Empire, as they're dealing with issues. Oh, hey, if that falls, that means God is no longer God, kind of thing. And as he goes through that and talks about that God is still God, despite the fact that civilizations rise and fall. Blessed be the name of the Lord in the midst of all that. And so that really becomes this idea of, is my loyalties to the American flag, or is my loyalties to Christ, in the midst of all that? And so what does it mean to live as a Christian in the midst of those kinds of scenarios that people are dealing with, and could very well be scenarios that we deal with in our own.
Yeah, for sure.
So
definitely,
what does it say about me and my Christian beliefs if I'm if all of a sudden like the EMP comes, right?
Yep.
And how I react not only with my family but then my next door neighbor, right? Kind of a thing too. Am I willing to sacrifice my own life for others so that others might live? Kind of a thing. What is all that? Right. I mean, all that comes reality, as we've already chatted about. People have wrestled through this stuff in real life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in that sense, I think Walking Dead becomes really more of a mirror image of what happens in the world and what is happening in the world. So
yeah, there's where the comics are now.
Yeah.
I've read through the comics. I have no idea. Like, this could be a spoiler if I share the comics. They've been out a while now. This episode, this issue, because I'm thinking like where I'm at in the comics could be like at the pace they're going in the TV show. Could be like 5-6 seasons from now. It's like they've gone so slow. And I'm like, what? What is going on? But there's a scene where like Rick like Negan and Rick are actually together. So in the comic, they're actually together, and Negan just saved Rick actually. And Negan's actually trying to get back into the good graces with Rick. And he's basically saying, like, okay, I kind of regret bashing your buddy's skull in, but I had to do it because he said he saw people as being weak. He goes, everyone was just going their own way. Someone had to come through and get everyone in line so we could survive. All these weak people were bringing us down, and I had to get these weak people in line to listen to me just so we could live.
Interesting.
And if I just bust some people's heads and take control of the situation and say, listen to me or this is going to happen, you do this, we're all going to be okay, things would work out. So it's almost, and it's like, whoa, that's interesting. And he basically said he got to that point because he forgot that we're human, basically.
Interesting.
He lost his humanity. He lost his love. And he's basically telling Rick, but you've shown me another way now.
Interesting.
What? Like, interesting, like you can go those two routes, right? When it comes to the thick of it, do I take to survive for my people? Do I, even the weaker people, just to get them in line, really knock some heads and then simulate them in so we can be stronger and better? And like it's very interesting, like the way it works. Like Negan has multiple camps in line, all making a certain product that benefits the whole, that if we weren't all linked together. So he views himself as the enforcer but he says it was wrong because I lacked my humanity.
It's interesting.
And he asked Rick, like, if there's anything you regret, and he's basically that I'm still alive and others aren't. Because Rick even realizes I've killed people or I've survived when maybe some other people that were nicer and better should have.
Yeah.
Like better people should have lived than me.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a little moment where they're both like, where are we?
Yeah,
like, we need Jesus.
Yeah. It's their come to Jesus moment without Jesus, right?
And like, where's Herschel? He's dead. So who's going to preach the gospel?
Yeah, that's right.
Is Gabriel going to finally preach the gospel or not?
And it sounds interesting because Negan sounds a lot like Nietzsche. This kind of wield of power. I'm gonna wield this as a kind of the stronger person and have to take over and be in this situation. And later on, realizes, hey, that's not the best way of going about that. So that's fascinating.
Yeah. Are there any characters that you really love in the show or scenes you're just like, dang, this is awesome?
I think Rick's son, when he suffered that head wound, that was that moment where it just shocked you. And you see him
and you didn't know that was coming, right?
No, because I don't read the comics. And so to see this hole in his head because of the gun that went off, and you're just like, crap, are we going to lose him too? Because that's been one of the fascinating things. One of the things I love and hate about The Walking Dead is your favorite characters aren't safe, right? They can die. Herschel died, right? We see, who was that one guy in the episode 1 and 2? He was sort of the moral compass, the guy who drove the RV. Do you remember his name?
The guy who drove the RV, Dell?
Yeah, Dell. He was kind of a moral compass guy too, and then he dies, and so you start seeing these people that you like that start dying off, and you become this whole notion of like, I think that's cool that they say, hey, no one's safe. At the same time, that also sucks because you start caring about these people. That for me was like, okay, is he going to die? Is this their way they're going to get rid of them? And then part of it too, I think there is this, sense for me where I want to see Rick redeemed.
Yeah.
Because I think he's going so far off the farm. And my concern was I saw his son get shot. Does that mean if his son dies, is that going to take him even more farther afield?
Yeah.
You know? And of course, at least he survived and those kind of things too as well. But in some respects, I think his son is actually stronger.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Than Rick is, right? There's a strength of character there. That you don't see in Rick. So
I'm hoping the show, just myself, I'm hoping the show goes on long enough that Rick dies. Because no one's safe.
Right.
If we're going to keep this principle,
right,
when's Rick going to get it?
Right.
So I'm hoping Rick gets it at some point.
Right.
And his son Carl steps in.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay. Like, it's interesting because Carl's really, the actor that plays him has had some growth spurts.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how long this show's been filmed, but from season 1 till now.
Yeah.
Like, the guy's, like, super tall now.
Yeah. He had puberty in the midst of the film.
I mean, it was great, right? I don't know if they looked and were like, we need a guy that has tall parents just so this will really work. Because we need him later to actually,
That's
fight
right. Yeah.
and take and hold a gun and do some cool stuff.
Yeah.
But, I'm hoping, like, maybe something like that will even go on. And then even Carl will be like, hey, I questioned my dad. Because he's questioned his dad throughout the whole show. Right. And it would be interesting to him finally be in this position and be like, oh, now I know how hard it was for my dad to make these decisions that he did some things I didn't think were right, but like I see why he didn't make that one decision because it's kind of hard to make it.
Right.
I don't know. It'd be fun just to see where this goes.
I think that would be. Yeah. Carol's an interesting character too because she is one that I think wrestles more with her actions and even the justification of some of the things she's done. I mean, she can be that killing machine, but you also notice that there's this sort of this sense of like, who am I becoming? And so she's. I don't know if it was. I keep quoting Nietzsche, but was it him that said that when you stare into the abyss stares back into you?
I don't know. I haven't read him. I just heard quotes from him.
Yeah, quotable quotes from Nietzsche. And so. And I think she stares into it and sees it staring back at her, and she doesn't like what she sees. And so I think she wrestles against this whole notion of who am I becoming, and I don't know that I want to become that. Although she's willing to step in when things need to get done. She's willing to step in to get it done, kind of a thing too, which is kind of cool to see that too. This struggle in her and that character as well. So I mean, I love the fact that they've really taken time to really develop these characters.
All the characters.
Yeah.
I like that there's episodes where you only see one character.
Yeah.
Only see two. Like, you could go 3 to 4 episodes without seeing some of the characters because they're building, when they get split up, they're building separate stories.
Right.
Yeah, I think I really like the Glenn character.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because it's cool. Like, he ends up marrying the daughter of the Christian guy, right? He actually does what's right and says, I'm going to marry you because this is what your dad wants. Like, we shouldn't just be sleeping together. Like, let's go and get married, and I'm gonna do things right because I recognize it's not just you, but your dad and your sisters. Like, I'm coming in as a family member this way. And when the dad does die, Herschel, like, it's pretty cool to see. He kind of carries on almost the Herschel role, minus the Christianity.
Yeah.
Like, he becomes Rick's moral compass.
Right.
In a lot of ways.
Right.
And I like the fact that there's so many scenes where he should die.
Yeah.
But he always ingeniously finds some other way to live.
Yeah.
And it's like he has this never give up attitude. Like, okay, we're going to get through this. It's like he's always thinking positive and pulls it through. And there was a lot of talk. I don't like to get into like the whole ethnicity stuff with characters. But he was like the only Asian type hero on TV is what people were saying.
Oh, interesting.
And like, so it's kind of cool that he's filling this position.
Yeah.
And in that world, I mean,
and not being a ninja.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? That he would have that there would be someone from an Asian background in Atlanta.
Right.
Like it's a multi-ethnic city. It's one of our big cities in America. You're going to have different characters.
Right.
So it's kind of cool to me that it's not like they're just throwing him in as the token Asian.
Right.
Like, no, it's probably accurate. Like the way the ethnicities are broken up in the show, is probably accurate to Atlanta.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I think it's pretty neat to kind of see that side of stuff.
And Glenn too. He started off as this sort of like weak character. He just seemed to be living more for himself and survival. Yep. And so, yeah, I agree. I like Glenn a lot, and to see him grow through that. Yep. And I think one thing that keeps him human too is his love of his wife, right? And the love they have for one another, and always wanting to get back to her. Maggie, he's willing to sacrifice for her and stuff, right? So I think you see, interesting enough, I think you see that somewhat ideal. I don't want to necessarily like to use that word, but of what a marriage should be, right? Of these people that care for one another. I mean, they don't always get along, they fight, but they still love each other. And at the end of the day, I mean, he's all about, you will live, I will die if need be, kind of a thing. And she also has that sense about her too as well. There's just that strong bond, and that's been cool. And I was angry at that one period of time when we thought he was dead. We thought he got torn apart, right, kind of thing. And I'm just like,
but that was again him offering himself willfully again,
right? Exactly. And it was cool to see that he didn't die.
Yeah.
But it was. I remember I was angry at the Walking Dead at that point in time. Like, oh, you had to kill off Glenn, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
But then it's like, oh no, you really didn't. You made it seem like he's dead, but then it made you realize again, no character's safe, and he could later on.
And I like what you're saying there. It makes me think, like, if you're going to pick a Christ-like figure, it probably would have been Glenn.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's always him going out, and like you said, initially it's more for himself.
Yeah.
I think he thought it was fun going out.
Right.
Like, I think it's cool. I'm going to get some goodies. I'm going out to get goodies.
Right.
I'll bring it back to everyone else, but almost him bringing it back makes him the hero.
Right.
Justifies his existence in the camp.
Right.
But then he gets married, and he still goes out.
Yeah.
And sometimes Maggie's like, don't go out. Why do you always have to go out?
Yeah.
Why is it always you? And it's like, well, because I know I can do this.
Right.
These other people, I don't know if they're going to get back.
Right.
And it's interesting. He puts himself in peril a lot for other people. Like you said, like especially in the marriage situation.
Right.
Like, so, and it's interesting, Christ-like character, before it was more selfish, but after Herschel and after getting married, being in connection with the one strong Christian character in the show.
Yeah.
Really, like, is he a Christ-like character partly because of the influence of the Christian?
Right. No, I think that's
like really fun stuff to think about.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. That is a turning moment for him, isn't it? When meeting Herschel and some of that too, and how that makes a positive influence on him and stuff. So.
And then Daryl, not in the comics at all. He's like the Lone Ranger.
Okay.
Right? In the TV show.
Yeah.
Like, he's the one guy that I would say you always want with you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, Rick or Daryl? I would pick Daryl over Rick any day, because Rick could sacrifice me to save himself.
Yeah.
Because like you said, he doesn't have this thing. But like Daryl seems to be very loyal. Mm-hmm. At first he was loyal to his brother, who was a scumbag.
Right.
But it's blood. Right. And then like when things happen, it's like now he becomes loyal to Rick and the other group.
Right.
And he's a survivor, and he's going to do what he's going to do. And then there's this episode, like one of those things I was talking about, where it's like only him and one of Herschel's surviving daughters.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, I find. That's the turning moment for Daryl.
Yes.
Because he had this, like, I'm broken. Who am I? What do I have to offer? In the old world before the apocalypse, I was a nobody.
Right.
I was this redneck. I was nobody.
Right.
But this Herschel's daughter, I'm curious if there's anything, like, am I reading too much into it? But her connection to the Christian lead character, this episode, she basically redeems Daryl by telling him, you're worth a lot.
That's right. Yeah.
Like, you're not who you think you are. You're not your brother.
Yeah.
Whatever you came out of is not who you are. And everything you came out of is made you what you are for this world. And she basically says, you're going to be the last man alive.
Yeah.
If there's going to be someone to survive this past anything, it's you. And I'm like, whoa, that's rad.
Yeah, and didn't that all take place in a mortuary, a discussion?
Did it?
Yeah. So along with that, I bet you the writers were talking about this idea of, dead to your old self, and he comes out of that a different person, right?
Yeah.
So,
and like from that, he now is Rick's moral compass.
Right. Right.
Rick does crazy stuff, and he's like, dude, like, I thought we said we weren't going to do this. like, why are we being the aggressors right now? We haven't,
Right.
no, they haven't done anything to us. Why are we aggressing against them? And I think it's interesting. Like, all that would have, like, before it would have been like, Rick, what do you want us to do?
That's
okay,
right.
whatever, because I'm loyal to you, just like I was to my brother. If my brother said jump, I jump.
Right.
Now I'm hooked to Rick. Rick's now my brother. Whatever you say, and like after that moment, Daryl became his own man.
Yeah.
And it's like I can now make decisions on my own, and they're going to be what I think's right. And I just thought it was pretty cool. I mean,
that is cool. Yeah.
Just seeing those types of movements. And
Yeah.
the TV show, I hope that was prophetic. Daryl's the last man standing. That's what I hope.
Yeah.
But
and it's I agree. It's interesting as you're talking. My least favorite character, I think, honestly, is Rick Grimes.
Yeah, I don't think he's.
So I think I would probably weep over more Daryl's loss.
Oh yeah.
Than I would Rick's
and Glenn's,
or maybe the tears for Rick might be tears of joy.
Yeah. I mean,
finally, unless they bring him to. I mean, one thing I hope that he comes back from the abyss. That's the thing about Rick. I think he's just. Yeah, the guy's been beaten up. He's gone through a lot of crap.
Yep.
But they all have too as well, and he's the one that just kind of keeps seeming to be going in that direction. Yeah. And if he doesn't listen to these voices, it's sort of like parallel to Star Wars, where I read an interview years ago with George Lucas. He said that Star Wars, the original Star Wars at least, the story was all about the redemption of Darth Vader. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if that's going to go. Is that going to be? You have
to see the whole series to get that.
Right, exactly.
It's not about Luke.
Right. So is this going to be the redemption of Rick Grimes? Is that what's going to happen at the end? And even that means he dies at the end. Maybe there'll be this very sacrificial death where you're like, okay, I'd like the guy, and he dies. This sort of like with Vader at the end, right? So,
I mean, the comics are way different. He loses his arm very early on, so he's like a one arm guy.
Yeah.
He it's all sorts of other stuff happens in the show. So in the comics, so
in the comics, he would lose his wife too as well. Does that happen?
Yeah. And his kid.
Oh, okay.
And the baby.
And the baby's gone.
Yeah. Okay. So there's like so many like little differences.
Yeah.
So I won't say too much more on the comic because it could end up being a big spoiler for the TV show.
Yeah.
But I mean, I already said at one point Negan and him are shacked up together. It doesn't. But it's pretty interesting stuff. It'd be fun to see like where they take it and what occurs. And for me, I just love the show because most shows I've seen, I don't really like watching because it usually like the drama is more. Well, you just had sex with my boyfriend.
Yeah.
And like I watched that show Nashville for a little bit.
Oh yeah.
It's just like here's one sex triangle, here's another sex triangle, and now let's switch it up. And like it's just.
Yeah.
What is the point of this show? Like, I don't enjoy watching this. Like, let's stop watching this, know? Because I don't really see too much of the ethical stuff. But to me, it seems like with this show, there's violence.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily always against people.
Right.
And if it is, it's a war-based violence,
right.
Which there are wars in real life.
Right.
So it's just kind of something more for me to chew on than what I usually see in other shows, which makes me really like it.
I was going to ask you this, too. Somebody told me recently that Rick hints at the idea that his baby is actually probably not his.
Yeah.
It actually probably was the other dude.
Uh-huh.
And I think there's a moment in there where, I mean, there's that when his wife tells him that she's been, shacking up with this other guy, but of course, Rick is very forgiving, which is, because he's like, well, yeah, you thought I was dead kind of a thing, and the other guy goes off the rail kind of a thing and becomes really weird. And so we're all kind of happy to see him dead, but
he's what? Sorry, go ahead.
But it's cool though that Rick knows this is not my baby, but
yep,
I'm going to treat it like my own anyway. So there is that glimmer of light for me of Rick when it comes to his daughter, kind of thing. But it's like I also want him. Be the man that your daughter needs you to be.
And I never made that. I never saw that element that he's forgiving. I never picked up. Which, with where the show goes, it's a big time element that comes up, which I hadn't connected before. Like the reason he maybe does what he's about to do in the next season, probably the TV show, is if they stick to the comic, is because of the forgiving nature
Right.
stuff. So it's really cool to just see and think about.
You were going to say something about his.
Oh, I was going to say, you said the guy Shane.
Yeah, Shane.
Who's
yeah,
probably
yeah.
the dad of the little baby.
Yeah.
You said he went off the rails.
Yeah.
I was going to say what Shane became, or what Shane was what Rick became very soon after.
Yeah,
and
that's
still
true.
is. So it's almost like
Foreshadowing. Yeah.
like Rick, right? Like you're basically Shane,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you didn't like Shane.
No. Yeah.
So like you're saying, Rick's an easy character to potentially not like, but Rick always does what's right for the majority,
Yes.
right? So he's one of those leaders,
Yes.
which, that's another thing to debate, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So anyways, any closing words, thoughts on just maybe zombie stuff in general? I think you mentioned a book through a messenger. I don't know if you get much on that.
There's a guy who I would recommend. He's a Christian theologian. He's actually, his background is in Augustine, does some philosophy. Paffenroth is his last name, Paffenroth. So he wrote a book called Gospel of the Living Dead, and he looks at basically theological themes in George Romero's films. So I read this one years ago. Fascinating. When I started getting kind of into the whole zombie thing. He has also written, though, some fictional novels that are really good. And I don't want to call them Christian zombie novels because you won't pick them up like in the Lifeway Christian bookstore. but they, and you don't see any characters in there that are overtly Christian. He's more like Tolkien in the way that he writes these stories. There are Christ characters that are intentionally, you see come through in these stories.
Interesting.
And I think he does a good job. And it's a trilogy. I think they're done really well. Highly recommend if someone wants to kind of delve in from a Christian theologian who wrestles through this kind of stuff, who writes on this, who's interested in the intersection of, theology and pop culture and all that kinds of stuff, and how he creates these stories and wrestles through these themes. I would highly recommend it. It's not for the faint of heart. There's some really rough stuff in some of the books too, but it's not gore for the sake of gore. And of course, reading that is different from watching it, those kind of things too. He's not taking this voyeuristic approach to violence or whatever kind of thing. It all has a purpose behind it, but very fascinating stuff. So
very cool.
Yeah.
All right, listeners, just remember it is through the good news of Jesus Christ that we're reconnected into a right relationship with God, which is that Christ died for all of your sins, that he was buried, and that he was risen again for our salvation.
Yep.
And so that message is with us. It pops up in interesting ways, maybe glimpses of it, like you said, of Tolkien. So even watching a show like The Walking Dead, keep an eye out for it.
Yeah.
Maybe you can make a little connection just for yourself, to edify yourself while watching it, or even to share with a buddy. So keep that in mind as you watch zombie movies or whatever show you're watching, and go in peace knowing that your sins are forgiven.
Amen.
If you choose to accept it, share this episode on all of your social media sites and with your email contacts, people who will benefit from listening to the show. Thank you for listening. Reconnect us, O Lord.